Good evening and welcome again to yet another program, Globespan 24/7. This Wednesday evening, a beautiful day here in New York. This morning, it was one of the most beautiful days in Guyana. I understand this morning, as everyone woke up, they thought it was snowing in Guyana. Maybe it's the beginning of a new era. And God, the heavens, is giving us that opportunity to see a new beginning. Ladies and gentlemen, as we said in the last program, Guyana is split right in the middle. Tonight, as we speak, half of the country and half of the citizens overseas are celebrating, and half of the country and half of the Guyanese overseas are in distress, because the election seems to go one way and did not go the way others may want it to be. As I said last week, is that elections, when we enter into any election, whether it's for the president of a club or to head a group or to be in an office environment, whatever it is, more so political campaign, we must recognize that one party will win and the other one will not. And we need to understand that. And I think Guyana has come a long way, but we seem to be not being able to get to that journey that we are supposed to be in. As I said the last time, that all the world and part of the Guyana's population is on one side, and another segment alone is on the other side, which is really sad, but that's the reality now in Guyana today. Tonight, to help us through this program, and we have a very compact, informative program, are four Guyanese stalwarts. No stranger to none of us. We know Mr. Nandlall, the former Attorney General, and a member of the PDP Civic in their election. Dr. Asha Kissoon, she is the presidential candidate of the new movement. Mr. Timothy Jonas is the chairman of the APNU and also a prolific attorney. And Mr. Clement Rohee, former minister in the last PDP government. So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our program tonight.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Anil, I want to start with you tonight, if you don't mind. The chairman of the Elections Commission sent a letter to Mr. Lowenfield, the chief elections officer. And the letter says, pursuant to Article 177(2)(b) of the Constitution and Section 96 of the Representation of the People Act, ROPA, prepare and submit your report by 1 p.m. tomorrow, which is June the 18th, using the result of the recount for consideration. Now, can you explain for our audience for the umpteen times, what does Article 177(2)(b) says, and what does Section 96 of ROPA says to us?
Well, perhaps we can start with the recount was concluded and results tabulated, and then the other important components of the equation are to be concluded to culminate with the declaration of the final results. And we are in those latter components or stages of the process. The Chief Elections Officer has already presented to the Commission a bundle of documents, and among that bundle of documents are two sheets tabulating the results both of the national elections and regional elections. And those documents, when you examine them on their face, they list the political parties, the regions, and the total number of valid votes received by each political party as per the recount. and then the grand totals at the bottom. And that was done by Lowenfield for the regional elections and for the general elections. And then Mr. Lowenfield proceeded to hand over to the commission a second bundle of documents in which Mr. Lowenfield proceeded unauthorizedly and, in my view, unlawfully to make adjustments to those total votes received by the different political parties based on Mr. Lowenfield's findings that allegations made during the recount process were established, and he then proceeded to adjust votes, deduct votes from the various political parties based upon those allegations which he found to exist. And he used some other permutations to deduct massive amounts of votes, in particular from the People's Progressive Party. So I want to make the point at this stage that Lowenfield already submitted part of which he was required to submit under Section 96 of the Representation of the People Act. And I will read what Section 96 says. It says the Chief Elections Officer shall, after calculating the total number of valid votes of electors which have been cast for each list of candidates on the basis of the votes counted, and I'm saying that that has been done, and the information furnished by the returning officer under 84(1), ascertain the results of the election in accordance with Section 97 and 98, and then he shall prepare manually and in electronic form the form that is required for Section 99 for the benefit of the Commission, which shall be the basis upon which the Commission shall declare and publish the results under 99. So Lowenfield has already calculated the totals and he has given it to the Commission. What he now was directed to do was simply to complete the latter half of Section 96, which is to ascertain the results of the election in accordance with 97 and 98, and then prepare that report which is required under Section 99. In layman language, what he's required to do there essentially is to, using the particular formula enshrined in the law that is enshrined in Section 97, calculate the number of seats which would have been allocated or won by each political party for the Parliament and the Regional Democratic Council, because it's regional and national elections. And to prepare, when that allocation is calculated, put it in a statutory form, which is set out as an appendix to Section 99, which is the report, what they're calling the report. So that is what he has to do, a very mechanical and mathematical exercise in accordance with the provisions of the Act and a formula enshrined in those sections. And then under Article 177, Article 177 is the article under which the results are declared. And it says this: where there are two or more presidential candidates, if more votes are cast in favor of the list in which a person is designated as presidential candidate than in favor of any other list. So I pause here to say that Irfan Ali would have been the presidential candidate of the list who has received the more votes than any other list. That presidential candidate shall be deemed to be elected as president. So when Lowenfield presented that 2 sheets of paper with the total showing that the PPP received that number of votes, and that was done since yesterday or the other day at the commission meeting, the highest number of votes, by the presentation of that, Irfan Ali is deemed elected as president. And the Constitution go on to say, and shall be so declared by the chairman of the Elections Commission acting only in accordance with the advice of the Chief Elections Officer, which she has received already. But that advice also should come with the allocation of seats, because in the declaration of results, not only do you declare the presidential candidate, but the declaration of results also has a component that says what number of seats are allocated for each of the contesting parties, both at the regional and at the national level. So the point I want to make here is that Irfan Ali is already deemed to have been elected the president, and now it's only for the chairperson or the commission to declare him a very formal ceremonial act, and also to disclose publicly, and all of this information has to be published in the official gazette, to disclose publicly the number of seats each of the contesting political parties would have received. So that is what Lowenfield is expected in a nutshell to do in those reports with various components tomorrow at 1 at a summoned meeting of the commission.
Thank you very much, Anil. I think you were very clear and concise, and I hope that the nation and the world at large understand clearly what you just said. Tim, following up on what Anil just said, says Gunraj, yesterday, the Commissioner Gunraj, he said that in 2015, after Region 4 count was done on the Friday afternoon, by Saturday midday, the CEO, Mr. Lowenfield himself, submitted his final report for consideration by the Commission. Now, this afternoon, the President and his ministers met. After the meeting, Mr. Harman continued to say that the CEO can only present valid votes taken into account the anomalies that were raised during the recount. My question to you, Tim, is, for our viewers, tell us exactly what are valid votes according to our law, and where in the law does it say that the CEO should take into account any anomalies that was uncovered in a recount or a count? Can you help us there, please?
You know, Charles, the answer is so easy that I sometimes wonder at the lengths that some people will go to mislead their followers and to create some kind of false hope, or more sinisterly to create unrest. You have different kinds of votes. You have valid and you have invalid. And for the purpose of this recount exercise, which is, recount just means to count again, it means to do over. So there was a count at each place of poll, which produced a statement of poll signed by the APNU agent, PPP agent, and the GECOM officials. The presiding officer signed it and presented it, and those statements of poll were added up. That was done on the basis of a count of valid ballots, valid votes. The recount did that exercise over again, opened the boxes and counted the ballots. A ballot or a vote is invalid if you put your X in two places, if it doesn't have a stamp, if you cannot ascertain the intention of the voter, if he has put his name or something so you can identify who the voter is. A ballot can be spoiled. It can be rejected for any number of those reasons. The vote is valid for the purposes of a recount exercise if it is clear what the intention of the voter was from where he has placed his X, and therefore there is no ambiguity, no doubt that he has placed his X to show his support for ANOG or APNU or PPP or TNM. That is a valid vote. So when you introduce an argument about invalidity because somebody made an allegation that the person who put their X clearly and unambiguously on that ballot sheet was dead or out of the country, you're talking about parameters and variables which are beyond the scope of the recount. There is a screening process by which you ensure that no dead people or overseas people come to vote. That screening process takes place, as we all know, when you turn up and show your ID card, and the officials, GECOM officials, APNU representatives, PPP representatives, look at your ID card, look at you, make sure you're the right person, and you stick your finger in the ink so that you cannot come back to do it a second time because your finger is then inked. That is the screening process that deals with dead and overseas people. So for the purposes of the count, which is a separate process, or the recount, which is to count again, the question of valid or invalid has to do with, did the ballot have a stamp on it? Was the intention of the voter clear? Did he vote? Did he put his X in two places? That is where the question of valid and invalid applies.
Thank you very much, Tim. And again, very clear and concise answers. And we hope our audience and Guyana at large listen to that. We have a clip here that was made, I think it was either March the 2nd or March the 3rd. Listen to this clip and then we'll move on again. Devin, can you help us with that clip?
But what I will tell you, our elections were, as promised, GECOM has delivered free, fair, and credible elections. And now I will hand over.
The general and regional elections were free, fair, and orderly.
How this process is going, Mr. Attorney General?
Which process? We had a clean election. GECOM conducted the election cleanly. We won the election. We have our statement claims.
I was out in several regions yesterday. I went to a couple polling stations in the Essequibo, in Bartica, in Linden, Skeldon. I was in a number of different places, also Rose Hall in New Amsterdam, and then finished in Georgetown. And in each case, things were well run and very smooth. So it's really a great achievement and a great success.
Everywhere we went.
That is a clip that was taken just after Election Day. And we have seen it, everyone, the president, the chairman of the commission, the attorney general, the observers, they all told us that the elections were free, fair, and credible. Asha, what Mr. Jonas and Mr. Nandlall mentioned in their explanation, and I think it's very clear as well. As a young person, Mr. Nandlall says, according to the Constitution, that Mr. Irfan Ali is deemed to be the president because based on Article 177(2)(b), that list that he heads received the larger number of votes. What are the sentiment on the streets in Georgetown today as a young politician? Knowing that Irfan Ali is president, do you think the PPP administration will do a good job, and are you willing to give your skills as a medical doctor and as a politician to ensure that changes that was promised, that changes are made?
All right, thank you, Mrs. Sugrim. First of all, I'd like to say that I do agree with the two legal minds that just spoke. In fact, there are two people that I've looked up to in politics. I've learned a lot coming into it as a young person and a first timer into this arena. I am dedicated to giving all my services and playing my part towards building Guyana and making it better for everyone. As for Mr. Irfan Ali and the sentiments in the streets, I have a clear feel because I'm with the people every day. I see my patients, I interact with persons, and the truth is it's split in the middle, as you rightfully said from the beginning of the show. There's half of the population that are celebrating and half that feel disenfranchised. It would be up to the PPP now to show the public, to show the population and the people that are scared that they would be left behind, that they are going to take care of everybody and not just their supporters. I know there are cases in APNU where ministers have come forward and said plain that I'm only looking after my people. I can say as an outsider and as a new time person looking in that I've never heard the PPP say anything to this effect. They said that they'd like to build a nation for everybody. I heard them mention inclusive governance. We know that constitutional reform is a must and changing of GECOM, but going forward, I would play my part. I would work with them. What I would like to say, though, because we've seen several videos going up about violence, we've seen racism taking a peak in the last 3 days awaiting the declaration. Right now, it's very tense in Guyana. There are stores and towns that are putting up plyboards on their windows. There are homes that the people have started securing because they're all afraid of what is going to happen. The sick and terrible culture in Guyana of non-acceptance of election results. I would urge everybody to accept, as I have, that the PPP Civic, according to the recounts, had the leading number of votes and they will be in government according to that. As we heard earlier, they said over and over the elections were free and fair, myself included. I can give my personal experience on election day. I voted without an ID card and I did it on purpose just to understand how the system would go. And my mother and I went to vote at the same time. She went in before me, she's a senior citizen. When I went in to do mine, they almost did not allow me to vote because I look like my mom. So this thing of people voting twice, of that people voting, I got there, they call out my number. 6 people were there on the line in my name on a list. They had to check for my picture and compare to make sure before I swore an oath to vote. So all these discrepancies they're claiming without proof, I do not accept it. I personally believe the elections were also free and fair. And going forward, all the narratives they're singing is to mislead their supporters. And it's the same thing in misleading the supporters that's leading to all the violence and the nonsense that's happening in the country. The racism, the threats continuously increase because the leaders are singing that narrative. And where the leaders fail, the followers also will fail. So right now, the PPP would have to stand up and show unity above all, and show the population and the nation that they're there for everybody. And it is my hope that they keep their word in going forward and doing that.
Excellent, Asha. And that's why I come to Minister Rohee now. He's being the stellar politician in this audience tonight. He has been there in 92 when the PPP won the free and fair election after 24 years of rigged election. Minister Rohee, what is going through your mind now? I'm sure you're thinking of 1992 when you were part of the Chedijagan's administration and before the declaration was made, what mayhem was on the street during that year. Do you expect the same thing to happen this year in these elections when the announcement hopefully is made tomorrow?
Okay, I'd like to approach this subject from 2 perspectives. One is the layman's perspective, the other is the political, because that's my area of focus. First of all, after the 2015 elections, I don't want to go back to 1992 because that's a pretty long story. And while there are certain common elements that show up in respect of 92, and these elections, we have to consider those 2 elections, or these 2 elections, have taken place in 2 different historical contexts. The 92 was a different historical context, and this one in 2020 is another historical context. So context in this sense is extremely important. What you recall, I'm sure many of your listeners would recall, that after the 2015 elections and it was basically known who was the winner, quote unquote, I must add, that the coalition leaders visited GECOM to press the then chair to make a declaration within a matter of 2 days after the elections were held. And I recently saw a clip where they were speaking to members of the press and querying why is it that the chairman is taking so long to make a declaration. Well, we have waited almost 100 more days for these elections to be held. And for us to wait another 24 hours, I personally, speaking for myself, I don't have a difficulty with that because I have seen elections in this country since 1968, and I can smell an election when rigging is in the air. Now, in this regard, there seem to be two moods prevailing in the country, in the society. And I like to talk about moods of people because it's extremely important to get a sense of how people are reacting, how people are behaving, the behavioral patterns of people, etc. Right now, the mood of a large segment of the population is one of highly motivated, there's a lot of energy, there's a tremendous amount of enthusiasm, and there are great expectations on the part of those whose party would have won the elections. Taking all of that together, it is clear that when that declaration is made, I foresee a jubilation that is going to stretch across the length and breadth of Guyana. But as the opposition leader pointed out, I think it was last night outside the party headquarters, that we have to do this in a very measured way. There's no need for any triumphalism on the part of the PPP and its supporters. And I'm just speaking as from what I've seen and heard. And I support that approach. So that the winner of the election, the PPP, has taken the position that, look, yes, we recognize that we've won. And in fact, people have become aware that the PPP has won since March the 3rd, when we had these episodes of the GECOM building at Hatfield Street in Georgetown. The moment the People's Progressive Party Civic put up their statements of support, made it public for everyone to see, and the fact that the APNU+AFC has not, up to this day, put up their statements of support, so that people could make a comparative analysis between what the PPPC has put up, has posted, and what the APNU has posted, that alone cast a shadow of doubt on the coalition's claim that they had won the election, because there was no evidence, there was no proof. The PPP had posted their evidence for all to see, and pressure was mounted on the APNU+AFC to do the same. Now the question is, why have they not done so up to this day? But be that as it may, even though they may not have done that, the fact of the matter is that as events evolved, it became clearer and clearer that the coalition had lost the elections. And let us be clear about this. Guyanese people are smart. Guyanese people are very politically conscious people. They've been through elections and they know. They can tell what is the result after hearing from the two political parties or after the two political parties would have presented evidence. But coming back to the question of mood. So on the one hand, there is this mood on the part of a huge section of the population who are chomping at the bit, so to speak, waiting for a declaration to be made in order to welcome in this new day which they've been awaiting for such a long time. On the other hand, there's a mood on the part of the coalition of despondency, of loss, of despair, and of lack of ability to govern and to execute certain responsibilities in the context of governance. So you have these contesting moods, which I think is reflective of the results of the election. And therefore, we have to take into account how the people feel at all times about the results of the elections, and their mood is extremely important. Now, the question was raised about whether we expect violence or whether we expect a replay of 92. Remember in 92, when Mr. Hoyt was the president, there were some episodes of street protests and violence, and the police had to be called out. But had it not been for the then US ambassador and President Carter, who were in the country, who intervened and took certain measures or made certain statements, I would not have, quote unquote, called off the dogs of war. I know that some people don't like to hear about this concept of dogs of war, but I've seen that so often in my lifetime. I have no difficulty in ascribing that term to protests that take place in the streets of Johnson. I don't want to label any individual or call any individual that kind of name, but I'm speaking about protests on the streets. So
thank you very much, Minister.
To conclude on this, I believe that we've seen a narrative, a change in the narrative, where I'm totally surprised in hearing Mr. Harman, the ex-minister, talking about the GECOM CEO being the boss now and actually shunting aside the chairman and the other 6 representatives of the commission. I don't understand this kind of blatant approach on the part of the coalition.
Yeah, Minister, we'll come into that later on in the program.
Wrong and sure.
Thank you so much. Mr. Nandlall, Riyadh is asking a very serious question. He says, can the CEO provide to the chairman what he thinks are valid vote? And if he does that, Dr. Rose is saying, can the chairman reject that declaration from the CEO? What happens then?
The chairperson yesterday at meeting made it very clear that GECOM, the commission, has no jurisdiction to validate or invalidate votes. That the GECOM has no jurisdiction and cannot clothe itself with a jurisdiction to hear and determine irregularities and make findings so as to determine whether a vote is valid or not. She further pointed out that the High Court is the tribunal which the Constitution vests exclusively, and she emphasized the word exclusively, with that jurisdiction. She pointed out that the word exclusively means that it was exclusive of GECOM, because Alexander et al. At the meeting were arguing that Article 162 of the Constitution, which outline the powers of GECOM, are broad and wide enough to embrace some quasi-judicial functions, that is to say, to hear and resolve disputes and allegations of irregularity. In answer to that specifically, the learned Madam Chair made it clear that the High Court is vested by the Constitution with that exclusive jurisdiction, excluding it from GECOM. So this is the commission. The commission is the head. The CEO is simply the chief elections officer. He's part of the secretariat. He is the head of the tail. The secretariat is subject and subservient to GECOM. Section 18 of the Election Laws Amendment Act says this: the chief elections officer and the commissioner of registration, who are the same persons coincidentally under the law, shall, notwithstanding anything written in any law, be subject to the direction and control of the commission. So the commission has outlined what the commission powers are and what the commission powers are not. If the commission doesn't have it, then logic would establish that a subset, a minion of the commission would not have it. So for anyone to argue that Lowenfield has powers which the commission is saying it doesn't have is a non sequitur. It's a ridiculous argument. So I say that to say that when the commission gives Lowenfield a direction, Lowenfield can go and determine by himself, as Mr. Jonas explains earlier, or explained earlier, to determine what is valid and what is invalid votes. The commission has determined that every vote counted under that exercise was a valid vote. The invalid vote were excluded at the recount process itself. And Lowenfield, to his credit, or perhaps to his ignorance, did tabulate the valid votes and presented it to the commission. So that is why I began by saying in my opening remarks that Lowenfield has already done the calculations which are required under Section 96. And all that he has to do now is to plug those totals that he had into the formula which are set out, the formulae set out in Section 98 of the Representation of the People Act. So the tail cannot wag the dog. The dog must wag the tail. Now you ask me a question, if he refuses to carry out the exercise, what can the commission do? In my view, under the Election Laws Amendment Act, Section 22 and Article 162 of the Constitution, the very two sections of the law that the commission invoked to do the recount, when you read it, it equips the commission with the power to take over the responsibility of an errant and recalcitrant chief elections officer and perform it for and on his behalf by publishing an order in the official gazette. That commission has exceptional powers to amend the Representation of the People's Act so that it can carry out the mandate of the commission and the statutory and constitutional responsibilities of the commission in the event of difficulties. You will recall that that particular section of the law or that particular act was birthed after the 97 elections or around the 97 elections, and also as a result of the violence which erupted after 92 elections, which you were asking Mr. Rohee about. We passed this law in Parliament, specifically recognizing that there are certain exigencies which can befall an election in Guyana that can render the election being incomplete and the declaration of the results held in abeyance. And it is to overcome these difficulties that the Elections Commission was specifically authorized with these powers to complete an election with fairness, impartiality, and expediency, and in accordance with the Constitution and the laws of our country. So there is nothing that Lowenfield can do which wrongly, which the commission itself cannot correct. So that's how I will answer that question.
Thank you very much. I think that is exceptionally well done. But Mr. Jonas, as we recognize being this program that this country is so split, Mr. Lawrence Scott said in his comment that that is not the law, what Mr. Nandlall just said, that the CEO and the chairman cannot direct the CEO. She gets advice from him. And Mr. Scott is saying that is the law. Mr. Harrison says he don't have a good feeling about tomorrow. Help us here, Mr. Jonas.
We're not in an area of difficult law or of legislation that's difficult of interpretation or ambiguous or vague. Advice is not instructions or directions. You've counted the votes. You know what the count is. So the next stage is to go and do your maths and to come back and advise me, not tell me, not direct me, advise me, mathematically speaking, and maths doesn't give discretion, 2 and 2 can't be 5, despite efforts in the CCJ otherwise. Advise me, based on the number of votes cast, how many seats are going to PPP, how many seats are going to APNU, how many seats are going to anybody else. After you've done that math and you come to advise me, you move forward. To suggest that that includes some kind of power to exclude some ballots you don't like because you think they might be dead people, and other ballots you don't like because some agent said they might be migrated, and in fact, entire boxes because you feel that a document was missing, to give that power to the CEO and then to suggest that the CEO can command the 7-body GECOM members that this is his conclusion and you have to run with it. Well, that's tantamount to saying let's close down GECOM. Don't let's worry to pay all of those 7 people their money. Let's send home the rest of the secretariat and let Mr. Lowenfield decide who won the elections all by himself. It's absurd.
Thank you, Mr. Jonas. Dr. Kissoon, Minister Rohee, as a seasoned politician, give some sobering thought there. Mr. James Brown said that APNU's strategy was to frustrate everyone. It did not work. What advice, again, as a young politician, will you give the supporter? I know you've been appealing to them. Talk to the seasoned politician within APNU, AFC. What will you advise them today if you were to give them advice and they listen to you?
Well, first of all, honesty above everything else. Coming into politics, we're told that it's a dirty game. It's full of lies and deceit. But on the way forward for a better future as a young person coming in, I believe that honesty must take the forefront. They speak of honesty and integrity, but they show us the opposite. What I would appeal to them is to be honest with their supporters. And to the supporters themselves, evidence always speaks. They keep forgetting the reason we got to the recount in the first place. Because of the false declarations of Clement Mingo, that's what we got here. We had a history or a series of activities that took place. Look at the dossier that they brought out. We should not forget that. That was simply to prove that the elections were free and fair and that a declaration should be made. The supporters are intelligent enough to look at all the things they've been doing and the proof that has come against these false claims they've been making. So to these leaders, I would plead to them to speak to their supporters, let them know the truth, and instead of fighting against it, ask them to come together and come up with a better strategy for next time. Because we know an election must have a winner and it must have a loser. Everybody's not going to win unless in the far future or near future, there is reform and everybody can play a part, minus the riggers, I must say. But on going forward, you must ask your supporters to keep the calm, acceptance, and tell them the truth. Stop lying to your people because the lies are giving them false hope. The lie is fueling the violence behind them.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kissoon. Minister Rohee, you've been, as you said, you've been in politics since 1968, and you've been a member of parliament for more than 30 years. Have you reached out to your counterparts in the PNC and asked them to let the law take its place and let them tell their supporters to accept the result of the election? Have you reached out to anyone within the PNC or any other party?
Well, reaching out to anyone at this point in time would be like a kiss of death. I don't think anyone at this point in time would want to do something like that. Only when, for example, a declaration is made and the APNU+AFC concedes. They have to concede. They should have conceded already. But they will have to concede after the declaration is made public by the chairman of the commission. And when they concede, then the president having been sworn in and having a new government in place, some, I suppose, and I speak here from my own understanding and my own appreciation of life experience, some amount of reaching out will have to be made in terms of the transition, which the OAS referred to. Remember, the OAS in their last statement spoke about the government putting in place arrangements for the transition to take place. So that transition will have to emerge as a result of some communication between the outgoing government and the incoming government, as was seen, for example, in 2015, in the aftermath of those elections. So that in terms of reaching out to, I don't think those fellows are in the mood to reach out to anybody at this point in time. Who they're trying to reach out to their supporters, to feed them with a whole host of lies and misconceptions and deceptions, etc., to make them still believe that they have won. And what is compounding the issue even further is the fact that this high degree of duplicity, where on the one hand we're hearing that, oh, you know, we don't interfere with GECOM, we can't instruct GECOM. But on the other hand, up to today, or up to yesterday, you hear Mr. Harman actually instructing Mr. Lowenfield on what he should do for what he should not do. And it appears as though electronically or otherwise, instructions are being issued to Mr. Lowenfield to make him believe that he's the main decision maker at this point in time. So I believe that Mr. Lowenfield has, in a sense, exposed his cloven hooves when he made that declaration to the commission recently, and actually threw out of the window the baby with the bathwater in respect of his assessment of the recount and how the recount should be dealt with. So that I think, again, I come back to the question of the present mood and the context in which we're operating right now. I don't think it would be wise for me as a leader of the PPP to go out on a limb, so to speak, or to act unilaterally to reach out to anyone at this point in time.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. But I think as part of the political process, I think politicians need to reach across the aisle and say, hey, you know what? Let's calm it down. Let's keep the temperature down. Mr. Nandlall and Mr. Jonas, Dr. Rose asked a question. He says the Constitution has been a major problem since the no confidence motion was passed. The Constitution has been a major problem in this and other elections. How soon do you think an ally administration would change the Constitution to also accommodate MPs with dual citizenship to become ministers and be member of parliament? And he also said that there are thousands of highly trained and skilled Guyanese overseas who want to come back home to contribute to development of Guyana. Will a new PP government seek qualified people from the diaspora to help in the development of the country? Maybe Anil, you can start it and then Tim can continue the discussion.
Yes. Now, you see, we have to be very careful, Charles, that we don't mix up issues. The problem that we have here has very little to do with the Constitution. It has to do with those who do not wish to obey the Constitution, the laws of the country, the rule of law, and the canons of democracy. We are dealing here with authoritarians and political dictators, miscreants. That's what you're dealing with here. Political demagoguery. Don't mix that up with constitutional change. Whatever the Constitution says, these persons who are demonstrating this proclivity, it appears to be part of their psyche and an inalienable part of their being. I don't know that any constitutional change will rectify the problem that they are evincing. You understand that? So I want to make that very, very clear. I am not entertaining anything about Constitution being deficient. in relation to what these people are doing, they have a problem, a fundamental problem in their brain when it comes to obeying the law and obeying the Constitution. And they have put this nation into mental turmoil and anguish over words in the Constitution. Lawyers have to be at every activity, Jonas. We have to be at every grass corner, street corner, explaining laws to people who, and that is a fundamental difficulty. It has nothing to do with the Constitution. You can give them the most perfect Constitution. If they lose the election or they lose the voting confidence, they simply do not want to play by the rule of the game. And that is a difficulty. I don't know how you will deal with that. Because civilization is based upon the rule of law.
Well, Anil, before
civilization is based upon the rule. I don't know how you deal with that. But
I know.
In terms of the constitutional change, we have said in our manifesto that we are absolutely committed to constitutional change. And that, however, we will not be the driver of that change. The people of Guyana will drive that process. We, of course, in government, will create the mechanism and lay the foundation for the constitutional reforms to take place. But we are not going to choose a constitutional model and impose it on our people. We will establish a constitutional commission that would be sufficiently broad-based, and we are going to have hearings throughout the country, hear the people's views, incorporate them, and take it from there. So we are committed to that. In terms of governance as a model, we are already in our manifesto. Again, I say we have committed ourselves to make the constitutional changes, to adjust our governance structure, to meet the expectation and anticipation of our people. But constitutional change, as you recognize, can be done by a government. The more fundamental provisions of the Constitution invariably will require two-thirds majority. So we will need the support of almost the whole Parliament before serious, effective changes can be made to the Constitution. In terms of the diaspora, we remain a government that will be committed to welcome Guyanese who share our common vision for developing a united Guyana, a modern country. We will welcome everyone, and they will have an equal place once they are qualified. We will not discriminate. We will follow the Constitution. And, once you are qualified for a job, whichever part of the world you come from, of course, there may be some bias towards people who are living here, and you can't fault us for that. But it will not be, it would be a fair opportunity. We are committed to that. Fairness, and welcome any person who wants to contribute to the development of their country. They will have a welcoming hand and embrace from the People's Progressive Party.
Thanks, Mr. Nandlall. But Mr. Jonas, I think you will take a little different view from Mr. Nandlall in that, yes, the Constitution is fine, but those who are supposed to uphold the Constitution, they're breaching it. We know since there's no confidence.
The Constitution is fine, that's the point. I didn't say that it's fine.
Okay.
I was separating concepts.
Okay. All right. Well, what I'm saying is that there seems to be no penalty for anyone who has breached the Constitution, or if it's done, it's very lagging way behind. If we look at our CARICOM countries, our sister CARICOM countries, Trinidad, Barbados, Jamaica, St. Vincent, Grenada, this will not happen because they have a head of government different from the head of state, and the head of state have some authority which that person could have implemented had we had that system. Mr. Jonas, do you see that happening in a new administration under President Ali?
When I spoke to Mr. Ali and when I heard him speak publicly, I got the impression that he, as the leader of the PPP, has formed a personal determination that he wants to leave behind him at the end of his 5 years or at the end of his 10 years, however long it is, a legacy of inclusivity. I believe at this stage, and perhaps, we have a new broom, and perhaps the PPP have learned from being out of office that, their assumptions that they made with 23 easy years, some of those assumptions are false. But I got the impression that Mr. Ali wants to do a good job. I hope I'm right. The thing is that a country cannot be governed on the goodwill and the good intentions of an individual or even several individuals. The system has to be one that is fair. It's not about individuals, because we're not a monarchy. It's not for us to say the king's justice is harsh or the king's justice is good. The system has to be a good system that the people from Lusignan and Annandale feel equally protected as the people from Victoria and Boston. And we don't have that system right now. We have a winner-take-all system. Now, I wanted to start by my impression of Mr. Ali, because what I've heard said today so far, to me, does not go in the right direction of creating inclusivity, of giving protection to everyone, and of making everyone feel as if they are secure and they should not despair. I heard Mr. Rohee talk about how the people feel jubilant and ready to move forward, but he was dismissive to the point of almost completely ignoring what you yourself raised, Charles, that 45% of the people feel absolute despair and hopelessness. Dr. Kissoon raised this, and she's right. We are split down the middle. The reason we are split down the middle is largely because of our ethnic demographic, largely because of our historical relations, how we vote, and more so because we have a winner-take-all system that throws 45% completely out of power, completely out of any say in the decision making, and that is why this is such a bitter war every 5 years. APNU is not walking out saying, well, we have some decision making power still, we can have influence here, we can talk there, we're included. They're leaving now with the knowledge that they are out the door. They have zero say in Parliament, because the new government will control Parliament with its majority. Zero say in the executive, because they're not even invited into the doors. That system has to change. There is no doubt that good people can run that system and govern properly, but that is not what we're about. We should not be the beck and call and the whim, hoping that we have a good leader, somebody with a halo comes like Jesus Christ or Lord Shivna to lead us properly. We have to say that the system is good and that the system guarantees protection for everyone. And the only way to do that is to find some form of shared decision making at the executive level, and that can only be done by constitutional reform. The other reason that I'm not comfortable by what I heard is that my friend Nandlall's approach is exactly wrong. There is absolutely no doubt, and Clement Rohee is right. Guyanese are bright people. This isn't about education. You can go and talk to your simple fisherman, your simple barber, your simple mechanic, and they have a point of view and they know what they're talking about. But none of them can draft a constitution. So they can talk about broad principles. But if you are going to create a system where you want to spend taxpayers' money, fly in Northwest, fly into Lethem, to talk under a benab to people, and you don't have structure in your hand, then all you're doing is blowing hot air, and you are deliberately wasting time without an end game in sight. It is possible to use bureaucracy to obstruct rather than to accomplish. We've seen GECOM do it for 3 months. And if you pretend that you want to go and have consultations here, there, and everywhere about how to draft a clause in a constitution, you're not fooling anyone. What we need is we need a proposal with a system done by experts that we then take to the people. And we say, here are the ideas. We give them snapshots. This is what the draft says. This is a snapshot. This is an excerpt. What do you think about that? This is what we've corrected. Get the feedback that way. But don't let's do what we did back in 2001. Spend a lot of money, go around and accomplish nothing at all. Let us do this meaningfully, or else I'm afraid you will hear that people have something to say.
Mr. Nandlall, you want to respond?
Can I reply to Timothy?
Yes.
I am sorry Timothy took me too simplistically. I began by saying that it will be a commission. That commission, I assume, obviously I didn't say it aloud, but that commission would be properly equipped, not only with political representatives, but it will have the technical support. And the same thing that Mr. Timothy is speaking about, the different models that will be crafted internally by the commission. But the point I want to make is that we will not impose upon the population. That's the golden rule that I want to emphasize. But obviously, the man in Timbuktu don't know much about the Constitution. So I wouldn't go there and ask him what he thinks about the executive presidency. That's not what I mean. I mean that you will have a commission that is qualified and competent, made up of representatives of the people, and who would be equipped with the necessary technical staff, who would be able to flesh out the various issues. And then you take that to the people and you have a constructive engagement. That's what I mean.
Well, Charles, now that has been said, good. The only point I'll make is that there's always been a commission. The commission never died. The commission just never did any work. And again, a bureaucracy can be used to do real work, or it can be used to obstruct. And as I also said, I believe that at this stage, Irfan Ali is sincere in his determination to do good things so as to leave a good legacy behind. And part of that legacy for me must be the implementation of a system by way of constitutional reform that includes everybody. We have a situation where we have large ethnic groups, we have large interest groups. We have a large Indo-Guyanese base, a large Afro-Guyanese base, and a growing indigenous Guyanese base. Everybody needs to feel fairly represented. Now, I don't want us to sit down and say, well, a commission will be formed and we'll do it. Because certainly by now, we have seen the fault and we have our own ideas about the structure, about where the faults lie. I want to hear my friend Anil say that this winner-take-all system is part of the problem and needs to be eroded, needs to be done away with. I want to hear specific examples so that moving forward, we have a framework within which we have a discussion. Because right now there's zero framework. And my starting point is winner-take-all.
You have different systems, Charles. You have executive power sharing, you have inclusive government, you have greater devolution of power from the epicenter of the executive to various organs. So I can't impose which model, but those are the different models that I'm speaking about, which will be taken to the people. Timothy seems to have decided which one he prefers, but I don't to make that for myself at this point in time.
Yes, Asha, I know we had legal luminaries battling it out, but if you want to jump.
I'm sorry, Asha. I'm sorry if I encroach upon your time. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. I see a back and forth thing starting between the two legal minds here, as with all lawyers. So I'd like to give a perspective from a third person point of view. Okay? Because this is something I see all the time. First of all, say that as long as there is a side to pick, the problem is going to continue. Let me explain. Getting into politics I was always accused of being a PPP representative or APNU representative. It was always either one or the other. Nobody accepted that an independent person could step forward, be passionate about their country, and want to make a change. Saying that now, as long as one or the other is in control, there will always be a side. And once there are two sides, there's always going to be a conflict. However, on the way forward, I understand why executive power sharing would be a concern because we have evidence that there are people in the system who are corrupt, who would like to rig an election, who do not want the best for the people. My suggestion is, and of the new movement, is that all persons responsible of electoral fraud should be exposed and charged. When you remove them from that system, a constitutional reform, or whichever model is chosen, needs to be specifically made for Guyana with this team of experts, Anil, Nandlall, this team of experts now could sit down and specifically tailor a system that would work in our country, that would take away from this one or the other side, and that the people could have unity and all feel represented. That's how I feel as a person looking in from the outside.
Thank you, Dr. Kissoon. I know I was going to take that in the next segment, but you started it. So when we come back, and I know Minister Rohee didn't speak, but when we come back, we know, as we said, our country is split down the middle. So I want to, you tell us, what do you think we can do to bring our people together? Having had over 50 years of independence, what can we do? And maybe we can start with Mr. Rohee when we come back. What can we do to bring our people together? And we'll be back shortly.
This is Richard David, a man championing the cause of the people, a leader who wants to take his district to the next level. Fighting for affordable housing, fair property taxes, fighting for tenants, fighting for protection and healthcare for all, especially immigrant communities and undocumented workers.
I'm the opposite of Trump. I really am. I'm the candidate that came here without my papers. I'm the candidate, I am the American dream. My family came here and worked our butts off to rise up, and we're contributing to our society. We're taking care of our neighbors, and that's what immigrants have done forever in this country. That is the story of America.
Even before COVID-19, Richard has been there for his people. He is a man who has worked in government for 10 years and knows how government works. He is the man who will make a difference. He is a man who will fight for you.
We need to rise up. This is our time. If we don't make our voices heard now, we're going to continue to be ignored. Rise up. Come out, vote. Please make this our moment. Vote for Richard David, District 31, and the elections on June 23rd.
You can count on Richard. Rise with Richard. Let's rise up together.
Globespan 24/7 is offering professional streaming services. Be at ease and let Globespan 24/7 handle all of your streaming services for talk shows, religious programs, funerals, and birthdays. Get professional streaming done with ease. Globespan 24/7 professional streaming services will give you the peace of mind that you deserve. Call 631-782-9272. That's 631-782-9272. Or email sales@globespan247.com.
Thank you, and welcome back to our program here at Globespan 24/7. Again, this is your host, Charles Sugrim. We want to welcome back all our audience, both on Facebook and on YouTube. We had a really great discussion the first segment. Now, as we continue, ladies and gentlemen, we all agree. There's no doubt about it. Our country is split right down in the middle. When, Minister Rohee, when will we begin to live our motto of one people, one nation, one destiny? What do we have to do as a nation to bring our people together and try to avoid as much as is practicable possible not to divide our ethnic group as we are today?
Okay. The first thing we need to bear in mind is that in a democracy, you need to have, or you ought to have, different political views advanced by different political parties. And so this question, or this concept of bringing people together, or this question of togetherness, in a democratic, in a democracy, it's not going to be something easy, because if you want to be very practical, the PPP has been around for more than 50 years. It has its followers and its supporters. It has its own philosophy and so forth. The same goes for the PNC. The PPP, some years ago, tempered its position by establishing what is called the PPP Civic. And that was an element of inclusivity, where it brought in a number of civic individuals to share in the government. So when we talk about shared government in the executive, at that time we said that the parliament, the cabinet would be 60-40. That is to say, 60% of the people from the PPP and 40% of people from the civic society. By the time we left government in 2015, that configuration had changed more in favor of civic individuals. And that is a very good example of inclusivity. And those civic individuals were not members of the PPP. They did not have a party card. They did not sit in party group meetings or anything of the sort. All they had was a common or a shared vision where the country must go. The other thing is that when you came to Parliament, let us not forget that there was constitutional reform in this country, where you had in the Parliament established a number of different committees. A number of different committees were established in the Parliament, which when the government changed in 2015, the opposition, the then opposition, then government, took total control of all of those bodies, which ought not have been so. Those bodies were established in order to facilitate a sharing of responsibilities in the Parliament, insofar as the functions of Parliament were concerned. So that I think we need to always bear in mind, because we don't want to, again, as I said earlier, throw the baby with the bathwater and forget the historical antecedents in this respect. Now, if it is that we want to go further in terms of constitutional reform, well, that is a matter which I think has already been decided. We seem to be going around in circles in this discussion on this matter. The matter has already been decided. There's been a long discussion on this publicly. And as Mr. Nandlall pointed out, the party in its manifesto, and you must hold the party accountable. The party in its manifesto is committed to constitutional reform. Insofar as the system of governance is concerned, as Mr. Timothy Jonas raised, Mr. Jagdeo himself publicly said that he would like to see a change in the system of governance in Guyana. Now, we just can't brush these opinions aside. I think people must take note of what was said and hold the individuals accountable in the future for what they committed to. We can't be too presumptive. Right now, the PPP is not in a position to do anything but make declarations and commitments. When the PPPC gets into government with Mr. Ifanali as the president, then we can expect it to deliver. Most governments are judged on the basis of its capacity to deliver. Either you deliver or you don't deliver. If you don't deliver like the APNU+AFC has done, they will fail. If you deliver, as the PPP has been delivered from 92 up to 2015, they will be re-elected. And so we have to be careful that we don't be too presumptive at this point in time. We expect the PPP to be doing certain things, except make statements, declarations, and commitments, which they ought to be held accountable to. Let us wait until the government settles in and holds a lever of power in order for them to actually do what we expect them to do.
Thank you, Minister.
Going back to this question of togetherness, let us look at democracies around the world. India, United States, United Kingdom, even in the smallest democracies in the Caribbean. We can't be too utopian about this whole question of togetherness. We have to be practical politicians, recognize that in a democracy, you will try to reach out as far as you could in the parliament in order to get things done. And obviously, of course, if the two political parties can have what is called a dialogue that was there during the time when Mr. Corbyn and Mr. Hart was there, sure. But there has to be a preparedness and a willingness and a sense of trust on both sides, and a cooling down of the atmosphere, because in this atmosphere that we have right now, I'm speaking about this atmosphere that we have right now, I don't think anything can happen now, save and except statement being made by the political leaders to tell their supporters, look guys, let us celebrate, but in a measured way, as Mr. Jackie has said. But by the way, I'm not hearing that from the government side, you know. What I'm hearing is that they're pumping up their supporters on the ground and mobilizing their supporters on the ground to oppose any action that might be taken by GECOM, which is not in keeping with their view of how things are.
All right, Minister. Thank you very much. Your point is well taken. Why I say that is because the last government, before the election of 2015, they did promise a whole lot of different things, and one of it was constitutional reform, and we know that never happened. So our politicians...
Ask Timothy about Nigel Hughes on that.
I know. But Mr. Nandlall, Jonathan Sobrian asked a very good question, and he says, will the next administration have a policy of meritocracy, transparency, and accountability? And will you push for that in the next government?
Charles, you are an accountant, and you would be aware of the institutional mechanisms that we have put in the Guyana public accounting structure, having regard to what we inherited, a system with absolutely no accountability at the level of the government, where the auditor report was never submitted for 10 consecutive years. The office of the president was selling out rice mills and state assets. They had nothing. We introduced a policy of how we will deal with state assets disposals. You remember that? We set up a body, NISIL, and the privatization unit staffed with non-political people and political persons. And we established a whole policy paper on how these assets are going to be dealt with. At the level of the Auditor General, we comprehensively reformed the system. We removed the audit office from a department of the Minister of Finance, and we created an audit office with its own autonomy akin to that of the judiciary, with an Auditor General report every year presented to place before the Parliament and to be scrutinized by a Public Accounts Committee chaired by the opposition. We also brought a modern, at the time, the most modern procurement legislation into place. We brought massive reform in the constitutional structure of the Parliament, resuscitating the committee system that was dormant for 40 years before that, setting up this committee system, Economic Services Committee, etc., sector committees, which were all chaired by the opposition and equipped with the power to summon ministers of the government and members of the government, public officers, to appear before those committees and to be interrogated on various and of the public activities. Those are only some of the that we have put in place. So I don't think that we were and objectively assessed our accountability record was ever properly assessed. Of course, you had several sections of the media that went to tongue on this aspect of this thing and paint a picture of complete and utter corruption and non-accountability under the People's Progressive Party. Something that is wrong. I'm not saying that we were perfect. I am saying that we did a tremendous lot which we were never given credit for. We intend to improve upon that legislatively and at every possible institutional level. We can't do no less, Charles. We have won the election only by 1 seat. I've said before publicly that the history of the past 50 years in politics will show you, if you examine it, that a no confidence motion, once passed in one country, it never remains in isolation. It's always followed by another no confidence motion. So because of the political configuration alone, not that we don't have a desire outside of that, but I'm telling you that the political matrix of the parliament and the way our constituencies are structured, you have to perform. And we have committed ourselves to a high level of performance, meritocracy, accountability, and transparency in government. Our manifesto speaks volumes on these concepts. So yes, we are committed to them, and we were committed to them before.
And I'm sure your colleague, Dr. Kissoon and Mr. Jonas will hold you to those things.
The country, I am asking, as Comrade Rohee said, the country we are asking to hold us. We expect no less.
Beautiful. But Mr. Nandlall, you did identify a whole lot of great things the PP did. Just to remind you also that for 20 years, the PP did not hold local government elections. So that is a blood.
All right. Allow me to speak on that quickly. We did not hold local government elections.
Charles, let me interrupt Mr. Nandlall a second, Charles. Sorry, but I was going to suggest, you see, I heard him get into that lovely discussion on painting a rosy picture of accomplishments. And this goes back to a tit-for-tat argument. And I want to ask that we don't go down the road of tit-for-tat arguments, because we do know that the APNU has their own story. And one of their stories deals with what you raised, the local government. I like what Nandlall said, that we must move forward. I'm ignoring everything he said, trying to draw accolades about accomplishments, because the other side has their spin. And I don't want to look back, because he, of course, will minimize the bad and maximize the good, and no harm in that. We are at a stage now where there's been a change of government, and therefore all the old can come out from the roots. All the corruption can be pulled out from the roots. All the favoritism, all the nepotism can be pulled out from the roots. There's a fresh start with a fresh leader. And the question is, how does that leader ensure governance for all and a feeling of comfort and security for all? And that was your question. And I do agree with what Nandlall said. And I appreciate that he recognizes it and said it out loud, that his party has won by 1 seat. And the dynamics of politics in Guyana have changed. And I think that is important. His own recognition of that gives me hope, gives me some comfort that the intentions are good. Guyana has an incredibly bright future ahead. But what needs to happen is that the systems need to be in place so that everybody enjoys it, and so the corruption is minimized, and so that there is a sense of optimism in everybody, in every village. But we don't achieve that by looking back and trying to justify what we did or denigrate what the other side did. I think it's time to look forward. And to answer your question, how do we do it inclusively so that everybody's happy?
All right. Before Anil, before I know you want to respond to that, and Asha need to come in.
I don't want to respond. Not to respond to what Timothy said. I think he recognized what I was trying to say, but I just wish to tell you that there is an explanation that does not render the PPP wholly culpable for the non-holding of local government election. There was an agreement between the PPP and the PNC. And every year there was an amendment passed in the parliament. And if you go and check the record, every year until 2011, that amendment was passed unanimously to postpone local government elections. I mean, your program doesn't have enough time for me to develop the point, but that is a statement of fact.
Except to say that the buck stops with the president. And if it is not held, the president will be held accountable for that. In going forward...
Well, both sides... No, I agree with you. Okay. But both sides had agreed to legislative changes to create a new structure under which we will hold local government elections. And the other side, the two sides were never ready. And they both have to accept responsibility. I will not sit here and allow the PPP to be blamed.
And I don't want to debate on it, except to say this, that the other side is saying very clearly that for 20 years, the PP did not hold a local government election, even though you said they agreed in Parliament otherwise.
That is why I'm saying to you, as of up to 2011, the parliamentary record will show that they unanimously supported a motion to an amendment to a law to postpone elections.
Okay, and you can come in here as well. I want to ask Dr. Kissoon and Mr. Jonas this question that Mr. Leland Rupnarayan asked, what legislation and procedure will be enacted or should be enacted in the next government to deal with corrupt government officials? Is that one of the way forward? So when government officials become corrupt, they will be held accountable and face the music of the law. Mr. Jonas and Dr. Kissoon, you want to come in there? And tell us also what you think should happen to bring our people together.
Okay, so I'll start by speaking about bringing our people together. Let me mention, because it was just brought up, that over the 50 plus years, both APNU and PPP have made promises that they have not kept to the people. And this is speaking as an individual who has observed what has been happening. And going forward, let me say that to bring our people together, we're at a unique point in history right now. It's no longer just APNU versus PPPC. Take into consideration that new parties have stepped up. I will specifically draw the attention to our joiner. We have a new and united Guyana. Mr. Jonas is right there. The new movement, I'm here, and Liberty and Justice Party. We have a seat in Parliament. We will be putting our voice there. And in the part of playing unity, none of us are a racially based party. We don't have a specific following based on race. If we speak about unity, let us use these new parties, our parties, to try and unite the people. Because mostly our followers in the new movement are the young people who are not concerned about the Afro-Guyanese or the Indo-Guyanese feud and old-time politics, as it's known as. So we're at a unique point and part in this political system to bring unity now, as our followers are not specific to a certain ethnic group.
Beautifully put. And what do you think? What should legislation be put in Parliament that holds government functionaries accountable for any corrupt practices? And should they face the full blunt of the law when that happens?
Definitely. The question I asked myself when you brought it up is, why hasn't it been done already? We see clearly ministers guilty of fraud. We see high government officials doing whatever they please, saying whatever they please going forward. This definitely needs to be in place. We have been calling for it throughout our campaign season, and we stand by that. It's something that we hope to see going forward.
And I know, Tim, before you come on, I know that I did ask you the last time, and both you and Dr. Kissoon, and you were kind of trying to ask, I asked Mr. Schuman also, if President Ali asked you guys to serve in his government, would you object to serve in a government? The thing is this, you want to change things in Guyana. How better it will be if you change it from the inside rather than fighting from the outside. What do you think? I mean, it's only my view.
If President Ali is committed towards improving Guyana, he would accept that help could also come from the outside. Because for this 100-day plus terrible ordeal that we've been through, we did not give up. We continue to fight for democracy. And that in itself was proof that we could work with him, but we do not have to be on the inside. We stand independent as a voice for the people.
Okay. Mr. Jonas?
You made the point, Charles, and it was well made, that both sides have made promises, campaign promises about constitutional reform and that kind of thing, and thus the skepticism of the people. ANOG was actually formed when APNU+AFC broke their promise of implementing constitutional reform steps within 100 days of coming into office in 2015. We wrote the AFC, reminding them of that promise, pointing out the promise had been broken, and telling them if they didn't get off their behinds and get started with it, we would go to the people ourselves. So, having not received a response from AFC, we formed ANOG and went to the people ourselves. We were created for constitutional reform because the winner-take-all system will not work. It will continue to divide us. It will continue to have this mutual distrust and the 5-year cycle of violence and extremism that we've been seeing. ANOG has also said, and I personally have said, that because that inclusivity, the need for those two large parties to work together is so important, because they represent the largest factions, the Indo-Guyanese and the Afro-Guyanese. We will not form a coalition or accept office within any of those parties until we have achieved our objective. So when we see them making decisions together in a system of true inclusivity, we can have this discussion. But until then, as long as one is on the outside and the 45% of the population that they represent is completely ostracized and in despair or feels that way, we can't join the bandwagon. It's not going to work like that.
Beautifully put. And will you support, Mr. Nandlall, maybe you can come in here, Tim, will you support using your one seat in Parliament to push legislation to ensure that government officials are held accountable for corrupt practices?
I like your question, Charles. And the reason I like the question is that it is so deceptive in its simplicity. It is the perfect question that you would go out to ask someone so as to get the obvious knee-jerk answer. Yes, of course, you must have legislation that make government officials liable to be punished for corruption. But when you condescend now to the nitty-gritty of how this legislation will work, electoral fraud is a crime, and therefore legislation exists to punish people for electoral fraud, but no one in Guyana has ever been punished for electoral fraud. So the question then is not so much this nice broad strokes of, oh, should we be punishing corrupt officials? Who's going to say we mustn't punish corrupt officials? All must be punished. The question is, first of all, how to prevent people from being corrupt, and second of all, how to have a system that catches them quickly when they're corrupt and therefore punishes them. Now, after the PPP was put out of office in 2015, there was a lot of hype, terrible PPP corruption and that kind of thing. I'm not getting into the veracity or not veracity. That's not part of the discussion. But you had a triumphalist parading of PPP dignitaries before the police and before the courts, some of them in shackles, some of them called in for questioning without arrest warrants. All of that done for the public, to put them through this hall of shame, to embarrass them. That is not what we need, because the whole of Guyana saw the end result of that. Not a single meaningful conviction. We have now a president-elect that half of the country says 19 charges. Who implemented those charges? The same people who failed with every single charge that has been put against his colleagues in the people. So I am not saying that he should not be charged or that he should be charged. But I'm saying that we get into this enmity and this brouhaha with the two parties battling it out. And then we ask questions like that. Should they be charged if they're corrupt? But we don't condescend to how do we fix our system. So let me please answer your question on how to fix the system. The legislation that is passed, and you heard Anil touting some of the legislation, it's passed and has been passed usually by the government, which has a majority in parliament and therefore can pass its own laws. And you will find that most of those laws give to the minister, who is a member of the executive, all the power. So that under the Petroleum Act, the minister has extensive powers as to granting licenses, granting blocks, that kind of thing. The way to avoid corruption is transparency. Power should not be given to an individual to be exercised in a way that the other side can't see. The first thing to do is to ensure that any exercise of power by legislation must be done under the scrutiny of all concerned. That is the first way to get rid of corruption, because corruption is done in the dark. It's not done in the light. So shed light on it. Let everybody see. Just like everybody was able to see what happened in Ashman's building because of the cell phone cameras. Let everybody see. And that kind of change needs to be done in each of those agencies where the purse strings are. NISL should be run by a board that has majority opposition. Central Housing by a board, majority opposition. GAIWA, GPL, all of them. Let's get rid of the secret decisions. Let's get rid of the secret exercises of power. And when there's transparency, when everybody's involved, there will be less corruption. But more importantly, or equally importantly, when there is a corrupt act, there will be enough witnesses so that you can punish the person who has done it. That is what's important. Transparency.
Well said, Tim. Except I wouldn't say by the opposition, majority of the opposition, but majority non-government control. I think that might be, I don't know, maybe same thing, just semantic. Gentlemen, it has been great this evening. We had great discussion. Our audience, they had great feedback from the audience. And as like every good thing, we have to come to an end. So, Minister Rohee, I'll start with you. Your closing comments and what do you want to reach out to the Guyanese people? We know tomorrow, just in passing, I want to mention this, that President-elect Ali was born in 1980, the same year that this constitution came into being. So he will be, I think, the first president to be sworn in post-constitution born or the same year. So I think it's also very historical. I saw on social media today that President Jagan was 35 when he became the prime minister. President Jagdeo was 37, and now President Ali-elect is 39. So something with the PPP and those odd numbers seems to be going in their favor. So Minister Rohee, your closing comment, do you want to tell us?
Well, you know what you just said there just now is representative or a manifestation of this view that we've been hearing for quite some time, that we must bring young people and put young people in charge. What the PPP has done, again, as it did with President Jagdeo and now President-elect Ali, is to do precisely that. Which Caribbean country have you ever had such experiences? So I think we need to look at that as a good example. But I come back to the whole question of mood of the people. As I said at the beginning, the mood of the overwhelming majority of Guyanese people. This does not mean to say you should look, as Mr. Jonas had intimated, at the other side who has lost. But in every election, you have winners and losers. And then you look at the television, whether it's in France, Germany, or wherever the case might be, you have the winning party celebrating. We have said that the celebration must be done, but in a measured way. And that message has gone out to the PPP supporters. But whether it is done in a disciplined way, whether the measurement is done in a disciplined way or the other, that will have to be looked at very carefully. But the fact of the matter is that you have a winner and a loser. Now, we are saying that in terms of the loser, you must reach out to them. Theoretically and practically speaking, that will depend on how the situation evolves. We cannot speak about that in isolation from concrete situation, from the concrete turning of events. We have to look at that in context. Once the opportunity is there and we see the favorable disposition, because as a governing party, one expects the governing party to be the one to reach out. Internationally, that has been experienced. But on the other hand, we must look at the losing party to be the one that must be prepared to concede that they have lost, to do so gracefully, and to recognize that Mr. Hoy did. You know, Mr. Hoy went to the swearing in of President Jagan at State House. And he worked with Dr. Jagan. He worked also with Mr. Jagdeo and Mr. Jagan. So all that I'm saying is that this is a two-way street. It's not only the responsibility of the government, it's also the responsibility of the new opposition to show signs that they're willing to work each other. And as far as I could see, not because I'm a member of the PPP or a leader of the PPP, I've seen PPP reaching out. The last point I'd like to make is this. When we speak about shared governance, inclusivity, etc., one of the key issues which we haven't spoken about so far is the question of the budget. We have to look at how the budget will be shared, how the cake will be shared. And if you go back and examine every single estimate submitted by the PPP or laid by the PPPC in the parliament, because that is a whole question of the sharing of resources. Who will get the resources? Either who will get the hog of it, who will get so many percent of it, or whatever the case may be. The budget is a critical indicator of how the resources are shared among the people. Once we see in that budget where the resources are shared in a way that is not discriminatory, and that each section of the population, each village, each community, each region gets a share of the budget which they have contributed in terms of consultations, because that is what usually happens before the budget, budgetary consultation. And once they are prepared and they're satisfied based on the project that they've submitted, because you have to submit projects. You can't just talk in the air, oh, we want resources, we want inclusivity and shared governance. The budget is a critical factor as to how the resources are going to be shared. This is what the discussion is all about. So I'd like to conclude on this, that it's also a question of vision. Who has the vision for the country? The PNC or the APNU+AFC claimed they had a vision. I saw Mr. Wickham from Cadre said, sorry, they didn't. And that's why they lost. We didn't say that. Mr. Wickham from Cadre said that, from outside the Guyana.
All right.
So the people
Thank you,
voted
Minister.
for PPP because they recognized that the PPP had a vision. And last but not least, I have been walking the streets of this city and in the country. And one thing I've been hearing over and over again is, boy, you know what? We want to go back to what we were enjoying when the PPP was in government. Everybody was saying,
all right, Mr. Rohee.
I think that is what is key in this whole discussion.
Thank you very much. Dr. Kissoon, my wife corrected me and she said I said gentleman and I'm leaving out Dr. Kissoon. So again, I'm so sorry. But Dr. Kissoon, in closing, what do you want to tell our nation as hopefully we will swear in the next president of Guyana tomorrow?
And that you mentioned the swearing in tomorrow. I'd like everyone to know that I'm committed to working with Dr. Irfan Ali as long as he has the interests of the people at heart. He will have my support. I'm going to work with all political parties that are involved in improving our nation going forward. I urge the public and the population to accept that the recount results are valid and have shown who has won the election. I urge them to keep calm, and I urge non-violence on the way forward. I'm calling for peace and unity in my closing statement, because in order for us to go forward, we still need to work together as a people.
Thank you, Dr. Kissoon. Mr. Jonas, you keep repeating, and I like what you're saying, that the PEP should reach out to the other side, that they control 46% of the population. Should President Granger comes to the swearing in of President-elect Ali, if it happens tomorrow? And give us your closing comment.
As long as Mr. Granger represents APNU, and APNU represents 45%, there's no choice. You have to work with the person who represents the party that has the support of 45%. Speaking for myself personally, I believe that individual has hurt his party, lied to his followers, and disgraced the office. I think that a lot of work needs to be done in APNU. But APNU is not going to go away, because APNU does represent 45%, and that 45% has an entitlement to have a say. Now, there are two things I want to say, and both are directed indirectly to the same 45% that represent the APNU contingent. You heard Mr. Rohee talk, and his talk was a typical politician's talk. He used two expressions. He said overwhelming majority, and then he said he's walked through the city, and again he said overwhelmingly. The response has been, we want to go back to the old days before 2015. Now, there's no overwhelming majority. My friend Anil was quite clear. There's a one-seat win. We're talking 45%, 45%. And if Mr. Rohee walked through the city, he certainly didn't walk through Tocqueville or South Ronville. He must have been walking somewhere else. So let us do away with the politics of this thing. One thing he said that I do agree with and I'm happy about is that young people seem to be taking over. Because if the old politicians are with a straight face going to talk about overwhelming majority, we need some young people to, be a bit more straightforward and direct about our situation. But to the 45% APNU supporters, I am saying to you that you have a right to a say. And the fact is that your leaders have not been honest with you. Mr. Ali has won this election. The PPP have won this election. And as hard as that is, he has said that he is going to do his best to govern for all. He can't change it in a day. He can't change it in 2 days. But he has to have the chance to change it and to demonstrate that he is going to rule for all. If he does not rule for all, in 5 years we have a chance to let him know what we feel about his leadership. But right now is a time for calm. It is a time to give him a chance to rule, to demonstrate that he is going to do it properly. And I am saying to you that a new united Guyana will be the first ones to protest and to quarrel if he lets us down in any regard, in terms of fairness, in terms of transparency, and in terms of looking after all of Guyana, not just half of Guyana.
Thank you very much.
Our country needs to move forward.
Thank you so much. And the PEP did not win 45%. They won 50.8% of the votes. But having said that, the combined opposition now, the government being the PPP from tomorrow, hopefully, the combined opposition, Anil, have 49.2% of the population. So I know Minister Rohee mentioned 1992 when President Hoyt was there with the swearing in of President Jagan. As a matter of fact, I was there at State House too. The late Komal Chan took me there, and that still strike a memory in me that I was there to see the swearing in of President Jagan. And the first thing President Jagan did in swearing in, he went across the aisle and shook hands with President Hoyt, and that was really a great turnover. We hope tomorrow, should the declaration be made and the president be sworn in, that President Granger will be there. But Mr. Nandlall, in closing, Minister Rohee talked about the budget as well. But right now, we know the treasury is empty. In closing, how can you encourage the Guyanese to have some patience, knowing that there is no money really available to do anything in the country right now?
Before I get there, Charles, I feel compelled to address an issue that I hear repeatedly being said, especially in Globespan, that, you know, the PPP represent Indians. And I want to reject that notion. Perhaps the PPPs, the base of their constituency, may be made up of Indo-Guyanese. But as you just said, we got 51% of the votes. The Indian population in this country is about 38%. It means that we got over 12% of the votes of people of this country who are not Indians. The truth of the matter is also that if you look at the combined votes of ANUG, of Asha Party, and the
Liberty and Justice Party.
Liberty and Justice Party, we got the 12% of our votes, which will be about 25,000, is more than 5 times the total votes that they got. We won a seat in Region 1. We won a seat in Region 9. We got votes in Linden. We got tens of thousands of votes in South Georgetown, in Georgetown. We can't accept that label that we are an Indian party. In fact, demographically, and if you check our numbers, we are the most broad-based party in this country. There is no other political party that receives support from right across the ethnic and racial divide more than the People's Progressive Party. So I want to put that on the record. The important thing is that we have won the government, and the laws of the country says that we must go into and assume office. Of course, we have a plan. We have a manifesto which we have disclosed, and the electorate have presumably voted on that manifesto. Of course, we in that manifesto we spoke about how we will treat with all the people of this country, including all the political parties. The recount exercise and the Mingo fraud that preceded the recount exercise presented a grand and great platform for the PPP to interact and work harmoniously with all the political parties. And we have done so exceptionally well. And we know that we have the capacity to continue. You have 2 leaders here from 2 political parties who have pledged their commitment to continue working with us. I have no doubt that the other smaller parties will commit or have committed similarly. We will embrace those commitments and work assiduously to make it a reality. The APNU+AFC, unfortunately, is a different kettle of fish. So it is up to their leadership. It is up to the leadership in what direction they want to go. But I have confidence in Guyanese. The statement have been made here over and over how smart Guyanese are. And I believe in the intelligence, the collective and individual intelligence of all my people. And I know that every day that passes and the APNU+AFC continue, the leadership continue to take this position that is against the Constitution, against democracy, and a selfish position, illegal and selfish. Every day that they continue to postulate in that direction, they are losing supporters every single day. And I hope that that will continue. And I further hope that in due course, a new breed of leaders will emerge. Because there is going, as Timothy rightly said, there is going to be a huge part of Guyana which may never come under the umbrella of the PPP. And that's okay. That's what democracy is about. Freedom of choice. Freedom to exercise your own political views and association. But I just hope and pray that a new leadership will emerge. Leadership that we can trust. Leadership who will rule in accordance with law, democracy, and modern precepts and concepts. Not the type of leadership to which we have been exposed over the past 5 years, and more so now. The immediate challenge remains to the country what will happen tomorrow at the meeting. Rumors are rife and are spreading that Lowenfield will continue his perversity. I don't know. I am not sure. All I can hope is that he will discharge the oath of his office and solemnly perform that responsibility which the law has devolved upon him. And he will accurately calculate the seats in accordance with the will of the people generated by the recount results. And we can take it, we can move smoothly, and there can be a smooth transition, and we can get on with the business of developing our country. Other than that, Lowenfield can continue his rogue behavior, and we don't know, we are not certain anymore where, in what direction we will go after tomorrow. But, there is litigation, there is the courts and everything else, but it is unfortunate that 30 or 40 Guyanese, the members of the rigging cabal, who can hold this entire nation at a ransom and place it, the whole future of this country, on the edge of a precipice. It's unfortunate that we have 30 or 40 people holding us like this. I feel very, very uncomfortable in that kind of setting. Nobody should have that kind of power over the rest of us and over the rest of Guyana. And so I hope for the best, and hopefully His Excellency President Irfan Ali can assume office, and we can continue together with the development of our country for the benefit of all of our people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nandlall. Except I just respectfully want to let you know that your computation of the percentages is kind of a bit flawed. You're assuming that 100% of the people voted when you say Indians being 38% and you got 50% of the vote. The thing is, you're using a normal average, it should be a weighted average.
I am a lawyer. You are an accountant.
I respectfully let you know that the PEP had a larger percentage turnout of their voter base. Hence, they have a higher percentage of the vote cast.
You want to extend the program and we continue the discussion? Because I can answer that to you.
All right.
Charles, I would like to give the equivalent to the APNU. Because if Afro-Guyanese represent 29% and APNU still got 45%, I think my friend Nandlall's maths might backfire on him in terms of inclusivity.
So we have a big math problem still, right? Anyway, Asha, lady and gentlemen, it has been a great pleasure tonight to have you guys on board. The discussion has been remarkable. The audience stayed on with us, both on Facebook and in YouTube, and I think they really enjoyed the program tonight. And on behalf again of all our audience and all the people who support true democracy, we want to wish that tomorrow, should Mr. Lowenfield submit the correct report to the commission, the one that verified the pronunciation of the tabulated vote that was certified, and the chairman pronounced, as per Article 177(2) of the Constitution, that the PPP list that Mr. Irfan Ali, Dr. Irfan Ali represent, received a larger number of votes, and hence that political candidate is now the president-elect. And I hope tomorrow, once that happens, President Granger can grace the occasion of President-elect Ali swearing in, and Guyana, as all of us here are crying out for, that we'll move on peacefully. As Jonas rightly said, there are a large segment of the population who will not accept it, and we understand your grief, brothers and sisters, we understand it. In 2015, the other side also felt it. But that's democracy. Let us move on, and hopefully Dr. Ali will do a great job as our next president and move Guyana forward. On behalf of Globespan 24/7, all of our staff, Mr. Nohar Singh and Mr. Devin Bisu, we want to extend again to our new president and president-elect Dr. Ali all the best in his new administration. And we pray God that Guyana will indeed move forward and live our motto of one people, one nation, and one destiny. Ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you so much for being us tonight. And to our viewer audience out there, thank you so much. Good night, and God bless our beautiful country of Guyana. Thank you so much, guys.
Asha.